"From now on, I want your paycheck sent to my account," my son said, his jaw set like a lock I no longer had the key for. The coffee pot hissed between us, and my hands, though steady, felt the weight of every year. At 66, I'd learned that silence is just another kind of permission. What he didn't know was that this was the last morning he'd get to speak to me like that. I had come to my own kitchen armed, not with anger, but with proof, papers, and a plan that would turn his demand inside out. Sunlight sliced across the laminate countertop, catching the grease-slick shine of last night's pizza box he left open. His phone buzzed, his thumb drumming, impatience tapping out a rhythm older than our arguments. The smell of Folgers mixed with the lemon cleaner I'd used at dawn, trying to scrub the fear out of these walls. Mark stood too close, a shadow over my mug, like he was already counting money that wasn't his. He said, "Mom," like it was a lever. But I'm Margaret Ann Pierce when I need to be, and today I needed to be. But tucked under that stub was the envelope he couldn't see, my new direct deposit, a separate account, and a notarized letter from my attorney. The tiny camera above the stove light blinked red, recording his words as neatly as the check register I've kept since '89. In my purse, the house keys were on a new ring, and the spare he thought he had was long gone, along with my old fear. I felt the porch air leak in around the doorframe, cool and clean, like the first breath before a dive. When he reached for the paper, I let him, because sometimes you let a person step right into the truth. You're wondering how a mother ends up here, staring down her own child over a paycheck and a line in the sand. I'll tell you how love turned into leverage, how favors became debts, and the day I finally chose dignity over silence. Stay with me, because the path to this kitchen started years back, with one small yes after another until I ran out of myself. And if you've ever believed that setting boundaries can save what's left of a family, subscribe and keep listening. I have the rest to tell. What happened next changed both our lives before the coffee even cooled. He slid the stub free and lifted it like a trophy he hadn't won. I watched his eyes skim the numbers, and I recognized the way his jaw moved side to side, as if chewing on a decision he'd already made. He thought the paper in his hand had more power than the envelope beneath it. He didn't see how long I'd been getting ready for this morning, how many dawns I'd stood at this same counter rehearsing my voice back into shape, like a muscle I'd let atrophy for the sake of peace. "You know what I said," he murmured, not looking up. "From now on, have payroll send it straight to me. Saves time, saves mistakes. I'll make sure your bills get paid." His thumb kept drumming against the laminate just to the right of the coffee maker, where the worn spot shows the shape of years. The camera above the stove blinked again, quiet as a moth. I've always kept good records. Nurses do. And I knew I'd want records of this too. "You're not my bookkeeper, Mark." My voice came out steadier than the hissing pot. "And I'm not your account." He smirked, one corner of his mouth punching a dimple in his cheek. When he was 5, that same face got him extra cookies from every church lady at potlucks. I used to tease him that his smile could lift a whole Sunday, and I meant it then. Now it looked like an old tool misused, the sort of thing you know better than to trust. "Mom, come on," he said, tapping the paper. "You get confused with online stuff. You've said it yourself. The notices pile up. You miss a due date. I'm trying to help." He said help the way some folks say hush, like it was supposed to settle everything. He had no idea how many times I'd practiced hearing that word and not folding under it. I reached for the envelope tucked under the stub and set it on top of the pizza box. The grease shimmered around its edges. He frowned. "What's that?" "Proof," I said. "My pay goes to my new account starting today. There's a letter in here addressed to you. Certified copies went out yesterday." His hand froze. For a breath, I could see the boy who used to sit on the back step in his Little League uniform, dirt on his knees, looking at me like I could fix anything. It was in the eyes, that searching, and it hurt the way a healed bone aches when the weather turns. Then his gaze hardened back into something older and colder. "You did all this without talking to me?" "I did it after talking to an attorney," I answered softly. "I've been talking to other people for a while now. Pastor Green, Mrs. Caldwell next door. Your Aunt Ruth. I needed to hear my own story out loud to see what it had become. He laughed, not with joy, but with that low, patient sound people use when they think they've got time on their side. You always overreact. You know that? One late bill, and you get the whole town involved. One. That was a neat trick of the memory, shaving years into a single sliver. I could have unrolled the list of ones. One car note I covered when his got repossessed. One rent payment for a place he could only afford if I forgot to eat meat for a month. One temporary ask that stretched like taffy from week to week until I forgot what life had tasted like before it. I opened the envelope and pulled out the letter with his name on it. "Read it," I said. "Please." He took it, and as his eyes moved, I felt a kind of quiet open in my chest, the way the house feels after a storm finally finishes knocking around the trees. He blinked at the notary stamp, the attorney's letterhead. The words we'd chosen were plain. I'd revoke any permissions he'd finagled from me over time. No access to my bank, no shared credit cards, no authorized user status, no auto pay set from my account to his. I'd closed the joint account he'd insisted we needed just in case. I'd placed freezes with all 3 credit bureaus. The letter stated that any further attempt to coerce, harass, or threaten me over money would be documented and, if needed, shared with the authorities. It listed resources for job placement and housing assistance. It gave him 30 days to vacate my home. "You're kicking me out." His voice was flat, as if he were narrating a weather report. "I'm asking you to leave, yes. I gave you a month because I remember how long it takes to gather up a life. I've done it before." He folded the letter once, twice, careful as if it were a fragile sheet cake. I could tell that care wasn't for the paper. He was measuring me like I measured medication, watching for the exact point a person might tip. He set the letter beside the pizza box. "You know I do more around here than you admit. You don't have to worry about the yard because I mow it. I fix things. I make sure you don't get taken advantage of by those folks who send fake bills." It stung, because there were days he had carried groceries in, days he'd swept the porch. That's what made it so hard to see the outline of the truth around those kindnesses. He was my child, and love makes a halo around even the smallest good thing. But halos don't pay for cracked windshields and bruised trust. Halos don't tuck you in when you can't sleep from worry. They just keep you staring up at a glow that won't hold your hand. "Last week," I said, "you used my card for things I didn't authorize. That wasn't a fake bill. You told me to get what we needed." "I told you to get milk and bread," I said. "You bought shoes, size 12 Nikes, and a gaming headset." He scoffed. "I got the bread and the milk. This is getting ridiculous." Ridiculous is how I felt the day I found my purse turned inside out on the laundry room floor. And he said it must have been the cat. We don't have a cat. Ridiculous is how I sounded to myself when I caught my reflection rehearsing lies for Ms. Caldwell about why I'd missed Tuesday coffee 3 weeks in a row. Ridiculous is the way your own home starts to feel when you tiptoe around someone you raised. Behind him, the sunlight struck the jar of marbles on the windowsill. Little round worlds I'd saved since he was a boy. He won a handful at the county fair in '87 by guessing the number in a jar. And he was so proud he poured them into my hand, one by one, as if they were precious stones. He asked me to keep them safe. I did. "Mark," I said, and the name felt both heavy and holy. "You are not my husband. You are not my caretaker. You are my son, and I have been less mother than banker for too long." He bristled, a tremor in his shoulders. "You think I like asking you? You think I want to rely on you? This is your fault too, you know. You always have to jump in. You never let me figure it out." There it was, the lever he kept handy. It had a familiar handle. Blame wrapped in logic, logic wrapped in proximity to truth. I swallowed. He wasn't wrong that I had a habit of fixing, of filling in the gaps people left like potholes. I started doing that the year his father packed his suitcase in August and called it getting some air. I filled the silence between Mark's sobs and the screen door slapping the frame. I filled our pantry with coupons and casseroles, Filled weekends with Little League and church picnics and library trips so the house wouldn't echo with what we lost. I filled out forms for Boy Scouts and summer camp and the dentist when his braces snapped a wire. I filled my tank to get to 2 jobs, then 3, because the world doesn't pause to let grief catch up. When he was 16 and got his first part-time paycheck, he'd begged for a used truck with a lift kit. "I'll pay the insurance," he promised. The first month he did, the second he forgot, the third he lied. I covered it because we live in a county where buses don't run past 8 and jobs go to those who can show up without asking for a ride. The summer he turned 19, he stood at the kitchen table, taller than me now, asking for a cosign on a loan just to get me started. We have all these euphemisms for the beginning of a decline. I said yes. The silence that followed when he couldn't make payments feels louder now in memory than the arguments ever did. I'm not telling you that to pity me. I need you to understand that every boundary I didn't set became a brick in a wall I had to scale later. It's a long climb at 66, but I'm strong in new places. I take my part in this, I told him. I enabled. I confused generosity with love and love with erasure. I thought if I could keep the water smooth between us, you'd keep rowing. That's not how this works. You have to want your own shore. "Don't talk to me like I'm in one of your church groups," he muttered. "This is basic. You got money coming in. I don't. We both benefit if I handle it." "We both benefit if you handle your own," I said. "I will help you look for work today. I have a list of places hiring. The meat plant on Route 9 needs packers, and they have day shifts. The city's public works department is taking applications. Ms. Lane at the library said they need a janitor 2 nights a week. The temp agency on Main Street asked me yesterday if I knew anyone, because they can't keep up. I printed the postings. They're in this folder with the phone numbers. I also put the number for the workforce center. They'll help you with a resume. There's a class at the community college on Tuesday nights for job readiness. It's free." He stared at me as if I'd just read out a bedtime story in a language he didn't like. "I'm not picking up trash for $12 an hour. I picked up a lot for less when you were little," I said. "Other people's bedpans, people's unkindness, double shifts for time and a half that didn't make up for feet that throbbed so much it felt like I was walking on marbles when I got home. I took the night shift at the hospital because they paid 50 cents more, and I learned to nap in 15-minute bites between your naps and fevers and the laundry. I cleaned houses on my days off because Mrs. Waller needed someone she trusted after her hip surgery, and I was that someone. I stood in a McDonald's visor for 8 months when the hospital cut hours in '92 and smiled so much my cheeks cramped. I did what kept our lights on, and I did it without pretending it was beneath me. Work is work. It's a place to stand while you figure out the next place." His face softened, then tightened, like a wave almost cresting into kindness. "Everything was different then," he said. "You didn't have the kind of bills people have now." I glanced at the stack of envelopes on the side table. Medicare statements, property tax notices, the bill for my blood pressure medication. "Bills have never respected decades," I said. "They have always come with their hand out. I just stopped offering both hands." He reached for the pizza box, as if something was under it he could use. He lifted the greasy cardboard and found only crumbs and a napkin I'd set there so the oil didn't stain my list. He crumpled the box and dropped it beside the trash can. "You're being dramatic," he said. "This is all because of some attorney putting words in your head." "Ms. Alvarez didn't put anything in my head," I said. "She put words on paper that say what I've known in my bones. I am allowed to be the steward of my own life. I am allowed to say no without explaining a story all the way back to 1983. I am allowed to change." He squinted at the camera light. "Is that on?" "Yes." I met his eyes without flinching. "We record everything now when money's on the table. The days of he said, she said are over. For both of us. If I sound harsh, I don't mean to. I'm trying to be clear. Clarity is kinder than compromise when compromise is killing you. I learned that from a nurse named Loretta who used to hum as she wrapped ankles in the ER. "You'll want to be sweet," she told me once, as I stammered apologies to a patient who'd cursed me. "Don't. Be clear. People can lean on clear." I thought of Loretta as I looked at my son, my Mark who I taught to pray, my Mark who I taught to make scrambled eggs with chopped ham, my Mark who jumped off the dock at Lake Monroe and swam back smiling, after I screamed because I thought he'd sink. He hadn't. He was always buoyant. But buoyant is not the same as anchored. "You're leaving me," he said, but he meant it the way a child means it when a parent closes the door to take a bath. "I am leaving this version of us," I said. "You can choose to follow me into the new one, or you can choose to not. That's up to you. But the new version does not include my paycheck going into your account. It does not include my wallet in your pocket. It does not include threats when I decline to fund your plans. It includes respect. It includes you looking your life in the face and choosing something besides this argument." He opened and closed his hands. For a second, I thought he might throw the letter, or the mug, or his shoulders back into the old fight. Instead, he looked down at his shoes, the same Nikes that had ruined the grocery budget, and gave a small laugh that sounded like surrender's cousin. "Fine," he said. "You want to play hardball? I'll find my own place, and when you forget how to reset your passwords, don't come crying." "I know how to reset my passwords," I said, and I did. I wrote them in tidy capital letters in a little notebook I keep under the phone. Not hiding, just honest, like a key under a doormat in a town where you know who's walking by. He grabbed his phone and slid it into his back pocket. "I'm going to Josh's. I'll be back for my stuff." "There's a list on the fridge of what's yours," I said. "I made it so we wouldn't argue later. If you think something's yours that I think is mine, we can talk. Calmly. The one thing that's non-negotiable is the tools your grandfather left me. They stay." He shook his head and headed toward the door, then paused with his hand on the knob. He didn't turn, but I saw the set of his shoulders. I know that set. It means I might weep if I turn around. "I'm not a bad person, Mom," he said. "I never said you were," I said. "I said you're making choices that hurt both of us. I am making new ones. That's all." The door opened and cooler air spilled in, laced with cut grass and the faint scent of someone's dryer, venting warm, clean lavender into the world. He stepped onto the porch and the door swung shut behind him with a click that felt like the sound a good lock makes when you finally turn it. I stood there for a long minute, not moving, just listening. The kettle stopped hissing. A bird pecked at the feeder someone's grandchild had painted 2 summers ago. A car passed. My heart kept time with the ordinary. When I finally sat, I did it at the table where I'd tutored him through fractions with beans from the pantry, where I'd filled out FAFSA forms and permission slips, where I'd signed my name over and over through the years in the blank spaces that make adults out of children in ways nobody mentions in baby showers. I took a pen and drew a line through today's square on the calendar. I had circled it in red last month, the same way I used to circle paydays and the first day of school and doctor's appointments. In the margin, I'd written keys, letters, direct deposit, camera, and I put a check mark next to each. Outside, a lawnmower started up, and I realized it wasn't ours. For the first time in 2 summers, I'd unpaid a kid from church $20 to cut the grass and bag it, and he was out there whistling the way teenagers do when they think nobody can hear. There is a holiness in ordinary sounds you didn't allow yourself to hear because you were listening so hard for the shoe to drop. When the coffee cooled, I still hadn't cried. The tears came later, when I found the baseball on the bookshelf from his game-winning hit in 6th grade, still scuffed, still smelling like July if you pressed your nose to it and pretended. But they didn't come as defeat. They came as thank you for that boy, and as grief for the man who learned to ask without looking in his own pockets first. I washed the mug, set it on the rack, and went to the bedroom. I slid the old jewelry box out from under the bed and replaced the house keys in the top compartment with the new set, the one that clicks like a promise. I took the spare key he'd kept under the chipped turtle statue in the backyard and dropped it in the jar labeled Old Keys. If someday we tell this story without heat, we'll say, that was the day Mom started labeling things too much. It'll be a joke because it will be safe to joke. Today the labels are my way of saying who owns what, and I own my time. I called Ms. Alvarez and let her know the conversation had happened, that it had been recorded, that he had left without shouting. "Good," she said. Text me if anything shifts. You did a hard thing. I have done my share of hard things. I have sat beside bedsides and held hands of people dying when their families couldn't get there in time. I have told strangers their blood pressure was high enough to worry a mule and gotten them to sit down long enough to take a pill. I have looked my own face in the mirror on mornings when sleep did not come. This felt like those. Scary, yes, but also right. A choice set, like a bone. Then I called HR at the hospital, where I've taken on 2-day shifts a week in retirement because I like the hum and I like being useful. This is Margaret Ann, I told the woman, who always calls me Ms. Pierce, even though I've asked her not to. Did the direct deposit go through? It did, she said. Right on time to the new account. Is everything all right? Everything is as it should be, I said, and I meant that like a prayer rather than a report. After that, I made myself a sandwich the way my mother used to. Tomato slices arranged like coins, a sprinkle of salt, mayonnaise spread to the edges, and just the right amount of pepper. I ate it at the sink because the plate felt too formal for such sudden hunger, and I let the juice drip onto the cutting board. I imagined my mother in her sun hat, the way she'd sigh and say, "Sometimes it takes a lifetime to return to your own name." She named me Margaret Ann because she said both names sounded like someone people don't talk over. She was right. I'd forgotten how to use the second one. I had been Mom so long that my own full name felt like a summons to court. Today it felt like flowers on a table. After lunch, I walked through the house with the folder of postings for Mark. I laid it on the edge of the kitchen table, not in a way that nagged, but in a way that said, "This is here for you when you want it." I wrote his name on the tab, and underneath it I wrote, "What you choose is who you become." I wrote it for him, and I wrote it for me. It's true at 25 and it's true at 66. My phone buzzed with a text from Ms. Caldwell, who knows more about the dilemmas of grown children than anyone in our pew. "Thinking of you. Do you need me to come sit a spell?" she asked. "Not now," I replied, "but keep your phone on later." "I always do," she wrote. "Don't forget the quilting meeting Thursday. Bring that blue fabric you bought at Joann's." The idea of touching something soft while the rest of this was hard appealed to me. I pulled the bag from the hall closet and ran my fingers over the cotton. The pattern we chose, stars on a deep field, felt appropriate. There's a steadiness to quilting, stitches one after another making something useful out of scraps. It's not unlike the work of repairing your own life. In the late afternoon, I sat on the porch with a glass of iced tea, the kind that fogs the sides of the glass just enough to make you wipe your thumb down it. The yard had been cut clean. I watched a boy on a bike ride by, no hands, and I wanted to call out the way mothers do, "Be careful!" But I resisted. He looked sure. He'd likely learned his balance the way we all do, by wobbling until he didn't. When Mark came back around 7, he didn't knock. Old habits. He walked in like his body remembered the permission I was rescinding. I reminded myself not to greet him with a sigh. "Dinner's in the fridge," I said. "Meatloaf and mashed potatoes. You can heat it up." He set down a duffel bag and glanced at the fridge, where the list was held by a magnet shaped like a cardinal. He read the list, eyes moving quickly. Mostly clothes. The old TV he'd brought from an apartment. The box of comics I'd always wanted to tidy, but knew enough to leave alone. He didn't debate. He opened cabinets and caught his breath in the place where I'd hidden my wallet last month, then closed them again with care. "I'll take the couch upstairs for a few days," he said, as if reading a script from a different play. "Josh's place is small." "You have 30 days, I said. "Use them. But while you're here, we have rules on the fridge. Number 1 is that we speak in decent tones. Number 2 is that we don't touch what's not ours. Number 3 is that we do a chore we choose each day and mark it. Number 4 is that we're in by 10, unless we say otherwise. Number 5 is that you check in with one of the places on that list every morning and write where you applied on the sheet next to it. There's a pen under the magnet." He snorted. "You've turned into a camp counselor." "I've always been one," I said. "I just reopened the camp." He opened the fridge and pulled out the meatloaf, then paused. "Did you put carrots in this?" "Yes." "I don't like carrots in meatloaf." "Then eat around them," I said gently. He stood with the Tupperware in his hands for a few seconds, then slid it into the microwave. He watched it spin like it might offer a map, then took it out at the ding and brought it to the table. He ate without looking up, but he ate. That was something. He was my son, and my son eats when he is uncertain. I have always known that much. When he finished, he washed his plate and put it in the rack. He looked at me. "You're really doing this?" "I am," I said. "Okay," he said. And it wasn't acceptance, but it wasn't a fight either. "Okay." He went upstairs with the duffel and shut the door to the small room that used to be my sewing room before I turned it into a place for him to land, for a while. The while had stretched. Now I was pulling it back to its shape. I sat there a long time in the quiet. I thought about the first time I bought this house. The realtor had handed me the keys and said, "You did it, honey." I'd cried, not because the mortgage was big, but because it was mine. That's what this felt like again, an incremental mine in a world where you share so much that you forget where your edges are. Later, when the house settled into its creaks and the night started naming them, I took out a spiral notebook and made a list of the sacrifices I've made, not so I could wave them like flags, but so I could see the ledger balanced on the other side. The night shifts, the second jobs, the way I sold my mother's ring to pay for a semester of community college that he didn't finish. The mornings at the courthouse paying fines for misunderstandings that weren't misunderstandings. The calls to places I would never have learned to spell if not for him. The summer I skipped the family reunion because he was embarrassed about his car and I thought the shame might swallow him. The couch I gave up in my quiet room so he'd have a place to rest. The men I stopped seeing because they asked casually, "Is he ever going to move out?" As if he were a weed I hadn't pulled. I wrote, too, about the good. His laughter drifting down the stairs when he played video games as a teenager and forgot I could hear. The time he folded all the laundry without being asked and left a note that said, "For all the times you did mine." The way he held my elbow crossing icy sidewalks last winter. The day he brought me a red carnation from Walmart just because, and I pressed it between the pages of my cookbook. We are none of us all one thing. We are baskets with both apples and stones. Today was about sorting, not dumping. The next morning, I was up before the sun. Habit more than anxiety. I made coffee and scrambled eggs, the way he likes with a bit of cheese. I left a plate for him covered with foil and a note that said, "Good morning." I wiped the counters with lemon cleaner, not because they needed it, but because the smell, bright and clean, told my nerves the world was manageable. I took a bag of donations to the trunk of the car, things that were mine to let go of. Dresses I wouldn't wear again. Towels that had been scrubbed into thinness. A set of plates that had belonged to an aunt who had wanted me to entertain more than I do. Clearing space isn't about filling it, it's about breathing. At 8, I walked over to the credit union and sat with a woman named Cassandra who wore a blue cardigan and had the kind of smile that makes you trust her to keep your secrets. We went through my accounts line by line. We set up alerts for any attempt to add a user, any transfer above a certain amount. We added a note to my file that said, "No overrides without me present." She looked me in the eye when she finished and said, "You're doing right by you." On the way home, I stopped at the courthouse to pick up a packet from the clerk's office. It was a simple notice to vacate form that would be my last resort if 30 days passed and he refused to move. I hope not to need it. People confuse love with willingness to be hurt sometimes. Love is sometimes going down to the courthouse anyway, because you can't keep bleeding and calling it compassion. The woman behind the counter handed me the packet like a recipe and said, "You'd be surprised how many folks your age come in for this. You're not alone." I blinked back tears I didn't expect. There's comfort in someone saying, "Many, many." At noon, I met Ms. Caldwell at the diner on the square, the one with red stools and a waitress who calls you sweetie when she sets down your plate. We split a grilled cheese and a bowl of tomato soup because some foods hold you together from the inside. I told her about the conversation. She nodded and said, in all the right places. When I finished, she set her napkin down and said, "He'll tug on the edges. Stand firm. Keep your kindness, but don't confuse it with surrender." We talk a lot about surrender in church, but the surrender I've done has usually been to tides that didn't care whether I floated. This surrender is to a shore I chose. It's different. By the time I returned home, Mark had done two things that surprised me. He'd taken the trash out without being asked, and he had put a check mark next to applied at City Public Works. He hadn't written more than that, but it was a mark. He was sitting at the table with a pencil in his hand, flipping it between his fingers. He looked up. "If I get a job, I'll pay you back," he said. It sounded earnest and also like a sentence he thought he should say. "I don't want payback," I said. "I want you to pay forward. Rent someday to a landlord who'll learn you're reliable. Groceries you buy without an internal debate. Gas you put in your car because you budgeted. That's enough." He stared at me for a moment and then looked away. "I went by Josh's," he said. "He can't take me longer than a week. The baby keeps waking up." "You have time," I said. 30 days. "And if I'm not out?" "We'll cross that bridge," I said. We both knew which bridge. Neither of us wanted to say courthouse out loud in this house. For the next few days, the rhythm changed. I could feel him testing it the way you test a porch swing after a storm. He'd lean a little and see if it squeaked. He'd leave a glass in the sink and wait to see if I washed it. When I didn't, he eventually did. He checked off 2 more boxes on the list, the meat plant and the temp agency. He left a mess on Wednesday and picked it up on Thursday. On Friday, he asked if he could have $20. "What for?" I asked, not unkindly. "Gas to get to the interview." "I'll put 5 in your tank," I said, and I meant both the car and him. He looked like he wanted to argue, then nodded. Boundaries are a language. You have to get fluent in them, and fluency takes practice. On Saturday afternoon, Aunt Ruth came by with a lemon pie and a look on her face that said she knew how brave and how tired I felt. She hugged me hard enough to remind me I had bones, and they were strong. She watched Mark when he came in to grab his keys. He flinched not at her stare, but at her gentleness. He has always been softer for her, perhaps because she never wavered when he demanded more from her than she had to give. People recognize when a person's no is welded at the factory, not bolted in aftermarket. Maybe one day he'll say the same of me. By the end of the week, a letter came addressed to him from the city. He opened it and read, then read it again with his mouth open a little. "They want me for an interview," he said, disbelief and pride darting in and out of his voice like fish. "Good," I said. "Wear the blue shirt, the one without the logo." He looked toward the laundry. "Is it clean?" "It is," I said. "I washed it yesterday. It's on your bed." "I thought you weren't doing my laundry," he said, and there was a tease in it, like we might step toward the lighter version of ourselves. "I washed one shirt because it felt good to do that," I said. "Not because I had to." He nodded, the concept landing like a new word in a lesson plan. He picked up the folder of postings without me asking and jotted down city with a check mark that had just the slightest flourish. That night, when I lay in bed and the quiet pressed around me, I remembered the day I brought him home from the hospital. I was 21, tired, terrified, elated. He was a small heat on my chest, his breath coming in quiet puffs. The nurse had shown me how to swaddle and said, "They like boundaries, babies do." I wrapped him tighter, and he sighed, the kind of sigh that releases a person into sleep. It occurred to me that some of us spend our lives either reaching for or running from boundaries. Maybe my gift to him, so late but still real, was a boundary that could hold even the parts of him that were all elbows and insistence. This story is not neat. I don't expect it to be. He is still the boy who borrowed and borrowed because he confused borrowing with belonging. I am still the mother who gave and gave because I confused giving with guarantee. But something has shifted. The house feels like mine again, and in that steadiness, I can offer him a place that doesn't wobble with every ask. There will be more mornings where he will try to slide old habits under the new door. There will be a day, maybe, when the 30 days are near and we will have to say out loud what we're willing to do next. I can feel that on the horizon the way you feel a storm long before it breaks, in your knees, in the thin place where past weather left a mark. I will be ready. The camera will blink red when it needs to. The credit will be locked. The letter from the attorney sits in its file. The packet from the courthouse sits in a drawer. My church ladies know the gist. Aunt Ruth stands by. The boy from the youth group will keep cutting the grass and will accept lemonade like he's being paid in gold. My quilt will grow under my hands, one star at a time, until it's big enough to lay across a lap on a winter night. And maybe, just maybe, Mark will learn the shape of his life with a paycheck he earned. His own name on the top, his own bank account. Maybe he will feel what I felt the day the lender handed me those keys. Fear, yes, but also a thrum under it that sounds like, mine. Before the coffee cooled that first day, I had chosen this. The days since have asked me to choose it again and again. They say habits take a month to make. I have 4 decades to undo. But I'm not starting from scratch. I am starting from a woman who has worked more midnight hours than daylight, who has made dinners out of almost nothing and holidays out of thin air, who has held a baby to her chest and told him, I am here. I am still here. I will be here whether he stands on his own or stumbles. I just won't hold him so close that neither of us can breathe. The sun slid down behind the maple tree. I picked up my glass and brought it inside. On the table lay an old picture of Mark in his graduation gown, his cap slightly askew. He hadn't wanted the party I threw him, but he'd loved the cake. In the picture, I'm holding his arm and he's leaning away just a bit, the way boys do when they want to be seen as men. We are both smiling. That is still true. Despite it all, when the light catches his face at just the right angle, I still see the boy who believed that marbles were treasure, and that if you put enough of them in a jar, the whole world could see how many there were. I put the picture back on the shelf and looked at the jar of marbles on the windowsill. The light made tiny rainbows on the wall. People think rainbows mean promises kept. Maybe they do. Maybe they also mean storms weathered. Either way, they made the kitchen brighter. I sat, and the camera above the stove blinked once more, as if to punctuate the afternoon. I reached up and turned it off and listened to the sound of my house settling around me. A good house in a small American town with a porch that faces east so it always catches the first clean light. Tomorrow, I'll wake up and make coffee. I'll read the paper. I'll mark one more X on the calendar. And when my son comes down the stairs, I'll say, "Good morning," and I'll mean it. Boundaries don't block love. They make room for it to stand up straight. Eu devia saber pelas pequenas coisas que chegaria esse dia. O jeito que minha assinatura foi ficando menos minha nos cheques, a correspondência misteriosa no nome dele, a conta de luz paga fora de ordem, detalhes que se juntam feito poeira nos cantos. Mas ninguém ensina a gente a perceber essas rachaduras enquanto elas se abrem, só o escorregar frio de alguma coisa se perdendo. Senti isso anos antes daquela manhã, um incômodo de que era muito para reparar, muito para calar. Mas a culpa, aquela companheira que caminha lado a lado com as mães desde Eva, sempre me lembrava que se eu endurecesse, tudo desabaria de vez. It was with all this in my heart that I saw my own son holding up my paycheck like a trophy. What he didn't know was that the wrinkles on my hands weren't born from just washing dishes, but from holding the world together so it wouldn't fall on him. It was the last day he would speak to me like that. And only those who have experienced a collection of injustices understand the power of that moment of enough is enough. The accumulation of small humiliations is like that pile of cold pizza he always left by the sink. Once was an oversight, twice was a habit. But after months, it served as a reminder that even the mess was mine to deal with, as if this ceiling were an extension of the uterus where everything returns to me to finish. He started by asking for a credit card to buy a few things, then asked to use his insurance address, then asked me to answer people on the phone, pretending he was sick to avoid charges. Before I knew it, half my mail was being returned, everyone suspicious if I was losing my clarity. You know, Margaret already missed 2 appointments this month. The neighbors whispered, but no one actually came to ask. The greatest humiliation, however, came when he looked at me with those eyes that were once so desperate for affection and used the word help, as if offering, not asking. It was always in the diminutive. Just an advance on the rent, just until they call me for the interview. The electricity is only this month because it's cold, but the cold, I knew, was here inside. I swallowed those I-onlys until I couldn't taste it anymore. When I finally pointed out that I needed the card back, the big excuses came, that I never let him be a man, that I made up problems, that I was exaggerating and spreading them to everyone. No mother wants to see her son get lost, but there comes a time when you understand that your fear doesn't bridge the gap. I kept all this bottled up, unsure whether it was better to keep quiet or shout, but learning to keep quiet was also a kind of crime against myself. It was Mrs. Caldwell, at the coffee table on Tuesday, who whispered after hearing my outburst about the money that, "It just keeps running out, Margaret. They don't realize we have limits too." She looked me in the eye and said, "You've said yes too much. There comes a time when love means yes to ourselves." And it was in that look, less judgmental and more connected, that I summoned the courage to prepare the envelope. The symbolic object of my enough came from a tender memory. The house key tied to the blue ribbon, just like the one my mother wore on her apron. It was the key to the medicine cabinet, the safest place in the world when I was a girl. And to it, I now tied the new copy of the doors, the bank password, the alarm code, all printed and kept in a gray folder. I needed to rematerialize control, a navigation chart so I wouldn't lose myself. When I tucked that ribbon and the keys into my purse pocket, I felt an ancient freedom, the kind we only experience once before getting married or having children. The belief that your destiny can change and you can finally breathe. The plan of action was born between silent phone calls after Mark left the house. Lawyer, pastor, neighbor, bank manager, each assured me that courage hurts, but dignity isn't built without scars. I placed the camera above the stove, arranged with the bank to cut off the electricity, closed a joint account, and even established the services he claimed to monitor to protect me. It wasn't public exposure, just the silent firmness of someone documenting. I even prepared myself for the possibility of a neighbor noticing a movement, because small towns in Indiana thrive on rumors. But I preferred the certainty of truth to the comfort of secrecy. I spent the night signing papers, testing keys, and sticking a note on the door. "The house is yours too, Margaret Ann." My full name, just like my mother wanted. When the climax arrived, a whisper, "Are you really going to kick me out? After everything I've helped you with?" was enough to realize there was no room for negotiation. Help doesn't erase abuse, and history doesn't justify a debt of respect. I was firm. Firmer than I've ever been, my voice honed by years of waiting, saying, "From now on, you only enter with your key, only touch what's yours, only ask for what you can return." He reacted as he always did, first with disbelief, then an attempt at bargaining, then the low-level anger of someone who feels they're about to lose their last limb. But I held the keys in my hand and heard the click of the door, my heart pounding as if I were 30 again. Not from fear, but from the amazement of choosing for myself. I confirmed the change at the bank, reviewed the video of the conversation, left the envelope with the letters, and listed everything with the meticulousness of someone who always knew how to take care of the little things, in silence. His comic book collection, the antique radio inherited from his grandfather, the box of wires and controls that only he understands. The only thing I didn't leave handy was the jar of colored marbles. I acquired those back when he knew how to separate treasure from trinkets. Now, they're my symbol that it's possible to keep only what matters. That night, as I washed my usual cup, I understood that this ancient pain of a frustrated mother needed to make room for the woman still learning to hold on to herself. Not that forgiving is forgetting, but it is releasing the weight to hold what truly fits. I focused on the sound of the neighbor's dog barking, the flickering streetlight, the smell of fabric softener wafting from the backyard. Signs that life, after all, was my size again. Later, I wrote in my diary, "Today was the beginning. Don't pretend it's the end." Hanging the blue ribbon of the key on the shelf was like hanging a medal, not of victory over another, but of reclaiming myself. If I ever ask why I did it, I'll say it's because no one should need permission to exist, especially not within their own home. And so, in silence, truth prevailed between a mother and son, making this small house in the middle of the United States finally a place of peace. The next morning arrived almost without me noticing, ushering in that silence filled with doubt that only those who have loved with fear know. I walked slowly through the house, my body's fascia still scarred from the previous day's confrontation. Not from violence, but from the effort to keep myself together, without bending my voice or justifying the impossible. I brewed coffee, listening to the kettle hum softly, washed my face in the warm sink, and noticed how the marks of time on me were not just wrinkles of age, but roads made by those who have only learned to yield. I opened the kitchen window and took a deep breath of Indiana air, that mingled smell of freshly cut grass and damp earth, and for the first time in years, the air felt light, as if the burden in the room had taken wing and flown out. The house felt different. Not because the furniture had changed, nor because of the new rules on the refrigerator door, but because of the sudden absence of a weight, the fear of displeasing, the obligation to remain silent. My hands touched the blue fabric of the keychain, and I felt I was finally navigating under my own command. That small, cold bundle hanging in the corner of the bookshelf was no longer just a utilitarian object. It was a password and a symbol of return. My home, my word, my limit, my peace. Mark spent the morning silent, restrained, making quick movements as if testing the rigidity of the new barriers. He glanced at the list on the refrigerator without comment, went out into the backyard, returned to his room, opened the refrigerator, rummaged through the drawers, trying to regain control the old ways. But he found nothing open, no envelopes of money, no hesitant mother on the edge. I went to the door, handed him a glass of juice, and said I was going to the bank to check on something. He nodded, almost a hidden apology, but didn't speak. At the bank, Manager Cassandra smiled broadly when I explained that I wanted a new statement, all access blocked, and alerts on my phone. "It's more common than we think," she said gently as she stapled my papers together. I looked around, other women my age, each with their own envelope, each learning to say no with calm firmness, and felt less alone. "You're in charge. This is priceless," Cassandra commented at the end, and I listened as if receiving an elderly blessing. I placed my new statement in the same gray folder as the night before, next to the lawyer's document, and thought, no one touches this place without my key. Returning home, I saw Mark sitting on the porch, his gaze fixed beyond the garden, his hands resting on his knees. He seemed smaller, not shrunken with sadness, but with astonishment at a world that no longer yielded to his touch. I sat beside him, maintaining a distance that was both new and old, mother and son, but now also two adults, each speaking for themselves. The wind swayed the maple branches, leaves flying like tickets to freedom. We stood there for a while, each of us gathering up the remains of our pride, until he asked, without looking at me, "Do you think I'm just a burden, Mom?" That question was a thorn and a request, an accusation and a desire for forgiveness all jumbled together. I breathed, hearing Loretta's old advice spring to mind. Clarity is also affection. No, Mark, it was never a burden, but the choices were dragging me down with it. I need to breathe. You do too. Only those who learn to walk on their own 2 feet discover the value of the road. He remained silent, his eyes fixed on the horizon. There were no more shouts, no more accusations. Only the strangeness of the new. The mother who doesn't back down. The son who needs to move forward. I placed my hand on the blue ribbon on the bag, remembering the trust of childhood, of Margaret before she was just a mother. That afternoon, I decided to pursue my own path, to do something that didn't involve Mark, the past, or guilt. I went to the local library and accepted Mrs. Lane's invitation to a sewing class. Between fabrics and threads, time felt more like my own again. A lady named Pauline taught me how to align the stitches on the rack while we talked about grandchildren, bread recipes, and the benefits of keeping a journal. I finally felt a sense of lightness, realizing I could add stories without simply being a supporting character in Mark's life. On my way out, I bought a basil plant to plant in the windowsill and some colorful teapots from the thrift store. Gifts for myself, just because I could. On the way back, I mentally sketched out plans to reconnect with estranged friends, perhaps visit Ruth in Louisville, perhaps travel alone for the first time since I was newlyweds. The world seemed inviting, big, and possible, beyond that repetitive asking and giving. When I arrived, Mark wasn't there. He'd been missing for a few hours, and he'd left a hesitant note on the table. I went out to try to take care of some things. I'll be back before 10. Is there any way you can save dinner? I smiled, not ironically, just politely. I prepared a plate of roast beef and cassava, covered it with aluminum foil, and added a slice of the carrot cake left over from the previous day. I went to bed early, feeling as if, little by little, the house was learning a new language, that of care without subjugation. The next morning, when I woke up, I found Mark in the kitchen. He was washing the dishes, something he hadn't done in months. He didn't say much, but he let his recognition of his role slip through his routine. On the refrigerator board, he had marked with a blue marker, "Submitted resume, Parquet Supermarket." I drank my coffee, gazing at the jar of marbles, my relics, the colorful light streaming through the window. I thought about how, in his childhood, each marble was a bargaining chip, a promise of play, a precious possession for a boy who believed everything could be a new beginning. Today, for me, they're more than nostalgia. They're a clear reminder that it's possible to keep only what's worthy, donate the rest, and not confuse treasure with clutter. In those days that followed, life found a new rhythm. Mark gradually adapted to the tasks and rules, to the boundaries between what was his and what was mine. A call came. The supermarket requested an interview. He, tense, asked for advice on clothing. I suggested the light blue shirt, the one I'd saved for special occasions. As I walked by, I noticed how strange it was. Years of helping him fill out forms, and only now did he seem to understand the weighty responsibility of those choices. That night, sitting on the porch, he whispered, "I always thought your stability was guaranteed, you know? That there was no chance you'd lack anything." I calmly explained how stability is the work of ants. Every careful choice, every offspring guarded, every unsaid turning into a yes to the other side of the abyss. Growing up isn't about never falling, son. It's about knowing how to get up without pulling on those around you, I concluded. Over the next 2 days, I sensed a kind of reconciliation. Not the kind that simplifies the past, but the kind that accepts the damage and resolves to grow from here on out. Mark stopped trying to access my accounts, stopped arguing about electricity bills or groceries. He started doing his own laundry, planning the rest of the month so as not to burden anyone. With each small victory, a clean plate, a note telling me to come back, "Good morning, Mom," I felt the pieces of love rearranging themselves without the glue of dependency. Saturday, while donating old clothes to the parish, I realized that the true inheritances left to children are examples, not of endless sacrifice, but of respect that begins with you. Talking to my neighbors, I discovered that many faced similar dilemmas hidden behind the veil of the perfect family. We laughed at the ironies, cried a little over the memories we hadn't experienced, and made plans to have coffee under the maple tree on Sunday. Just us, women who learned to build homes and finally, walls of the right size. That night, Mark returned from the interview, tired but changed. He brought a cornbread from the grocery store. "To share," he said, almost laughing. I sat with him at the table, we shared the bread, and talked about the future. He spoke of expectations, acknowledged his mistakes, and I, still cautious, allowed myself to believe again in healthier bonds. I didn't promise anything. Limits aren't concessions, they're shelter. "I'm trying, Mom," I heard, and this attempt, however small, already filled me with new pride. Sunday arrived with the strong smell of brewed coffee and fluffy cake. Friends came over. We sat on the porch, laughed out loud like teenagers, talked nonsense, reminisced about old stories. Life, stitched together that morning, seemed simpler and fuller, like a patchwork quilt made only of truly warm fabrics. Margaret Ann Pierce, that full name I now use with gusto, smiled at each introduction. I'm fine, I'm more myself. My son is learning and I've learned too. As the hours passed, time dissolved the last fears. I looked at the hanging keys, the blue ribbon fluttering near the window, the jar of colorful polka dots shining in the afternoon light. Everything there said, peace has won. The open wound from too many concessions was being treated, not with antibiotics of forgetfulness, but with real salve, the cleansing of guilt, the patience of acceptance. At the end of that day, Mark sat beside me, his feet firmly planted on the worn wooden floor. "Thank you for not giving up on me even when I needed the breaks," he said. "Thank you for not settling for less than you deserve." I replied, wiping a tear from my knuckles. "Son, love isn't just about saying yes. Sometimes the best love is saying no before everything falls apart." I learned late, but I learned. As I tidied the kitchen, I touched the marbles as if giving thanks for each color, each good memory, each difficult choice that brought me here. I thought of my mother, of the key pinned to her apron, of the lessons she imparted without fanfare, courage, honesty, pride in who you are, knowing the difference between opening your home and having it invaded. When night fell, I locked the door, not out of fear, but out of zeal. On the headboard, the blue ribbon reminded me that control over my life was back in my hands. I weathered the storm, not by hardening, but by giving myself the right to decide. Mark is no longer my project, but he will always be my son. Now he has his own path, which I hope will be beautiful and firm. And I, a veteran of silent battles, have relearned to love myself. My home was filled with peace, my mornings with hope. Today, when I look at the marble jar, I understand. Keeping only what matters is a lifelong task. My story became a lighter garden because I planted boundaries alongside the flowers. And if you, somewhere, feel like your time has come to say enough is enough, remember that freedom is the key, not a wall. May this story inspire you to keep what you truly treasure and let the rest go to the wind. Leave a comment telling us what you've kept for yourself. Like the video if it makes your heart lighten, and subscribe to follow me on future stories. Remember, when we learn to protect our own space, we open the way for a love that fits entirely, and no one can take that away from us.